exclusive, and it's also appears to be an exclusive on the front of The Guardian, although whether I haven't studied it too closely to see if there are too many differences. Here's the Daily Mail's take on it. Jamie, so what are we hearing about what the government might announce as far as the NHS is concerned?
It sounds amazing, about cutting lists in half for waiting lists for scans and for testing. And so you're not going to go and get referred to a specialist and then wait for the referral for a scan and then go to a scan. It'll be a much more streamlined process where, like you're getting an ECG at UCH, you go to that department, you've got your referral, and you get on that list really quickly. So there's not the waiting time, because we all know how stressful those waiting times are. And then when those lists get longer and longer and people's stress levels and your condition is worsening. So this really feels like a good route to cutting those lists and getting people seen more quickly. And that way you're really highlighting major problems very immediately.
And more broadly, does this feel like the government is aware that it needs to get on the front foot on some issues? They've had a bruising few months with the poll ratings looking pretty damaging for them. Do you think this is an attempt to say, look, we have got some good news here?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is really desperately needed news, because in the budget, Wes Streeting announced, well, Rachel Reeves announced more funding for the NHS. And the big question was, well, what reforms are you going to put in place to correspond to that price tag if you're not going to reform more, it's just goes into the NHS black hole. But this feels like the kind of smart, resourceful way of dealing with problems in the NHS. There's this incredible figure that 4 in 5 patients on the 6 million long waiting list would come off after they have a diagnostic test or an outpatient appointment. So if GPs can just do that in the first instance, you cut that waiting list by a lot immediately. And so it's just about smart ways of figuring that out, because frankly, we don't have finite money to put into the NHS. Last year's budget was a great news story for it, but that just can't keep up. So it has to become more efficient.
And this, coupled with pharmacies being able to prescribe for UTIs and different things like that, also cut the GP's waiting list.
Yeah.
So the combination of the two should really be a boon for the public.
And yet it comes off the back, of course, of the announcement yesterday about there being a plan for social care, but that it was going to be quite delayed. It was going to be 2028.
That is quite disappointing, because, to what we were talking about in the previous round, we have too many inquiries. This government has actually, there's a stat that's like they've launched a new inquiry every other day since they've been in government. So to some extent, there's too many inquiries. And on social care, it's not as if it's a new problem. People have looked into it, not least the Dilnot report from before. And again, recommendations are not implemented. And so the social care side of the story is disappointing, that we're basically not going to have anything for 3 years. And in the meantime, any health minister asked about it will just say, well, I'll refer you to the social care inquiry that's coming in 2, 1, whatever years. And it's just that is quite disappointing.
OK, let's move us on. And there's a story inside The Telegraph, Cindy, that's taken your interest about the impact of lockdown on babies.
Yeah, and, we talked about lockdown so much when we were in lockdown, and the different civil liberties concerns about it, the different marginalised people in society who basically don't have a good deal when it comes to working from home or whatever it is. But I feel like we've stopped talking about it since the pandemic is over, probably because people don't want to think about it anymore. But what we're seeing now is that the children who were born during the lockdown era, where you didn't have so many health visitors, you didn't have so much social interaction with other people outside your family, are going into school now, reception year. And a survey of teachers has found that actually a lot of them are struggling with just verbal communication. Often they're not toilet trained because, they just haven't needed to be. And so we know how important early years development is. What I'm concerned about is that this is already the early signs of a whole generation that are actually having their life chances quite condemned by the bizarre situation during those pandemic years.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see the very young children, the impact there, because there also has been great discussion about the impact on older children and their mental health as well.
Absolutely. And a friend of mine is a reception teacher, and when she went back after lockdown, she was like, they don't know how to queue up. Right. Like they don't shut the doors when they go to the bathroom because they're always just in their homes. And it's all of these little things that we've taken for granted forever. It's just, this is how you do it, and kindergarten and stuff in the States. And none of those kids are at the levels that their predecessors are.
Yeah, extraordinary. And as you say, we may well be counting the cost for some time of those lockdowns. Move us on to the Express, Jamie, because just today, the beginning of days of a state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter. gets underway in the States, and a lot of people reflecting on his time in office.
And more his time out of office. Since he was a one-term president, he is the biggest public servant I've ever seen, and the level of servitude he did in the 44 years post being the 39th president. In one of his books in 2014, he said, the most serious and unaddressed challenge is the deprivation and abuse of women and girls. And for me, and for what he did for women and girls, and house building, and talking about...
This is something you campaign on, we should say to everybody.
So I run Reclaim These Streets, so women's safety is paramount. And watching his commitment to all people and building houses and Habitat for Humanity well into his 90s. I think so many people are drawn to politics that are not drawn to public service, and he is one of my idols, and he was given the Nobel Peace Prize, but all of his behind-the-scenes support of underprivileged people in the States, and that people deserve a home and people deserve food and dignity, really has influenced my life and service.
What I think is interesting is that in the British political context, as our prime ministers get younger and younger, we're often talking about post-prime ministerial life and what should they get on with. You know, with the whole David Cameron Greensill story back before he was made foreign secretary, there was a big question of, well, you know, if you are in your 40s after leaving politics, what are you meant to do? Maybe you should just go to lobbying. But actually, Jimmy Carter is a great example of someone who made so much more about his time outside of politics than he was able to during his time in office. And so it goes to show it is possible to to be drawn to the public service part of politics as well as, you know, the power part of it as well.
And also he had many years to do it as well, 44 years, as you say, since he left office before he died.
And just watching him do Habitat for Humanity and be carrying hammers and, you know, and showing what you can give back was pretty incredible.
So it's going to be an extraordinary few days at that state funeral that we will be covering here on Sky News, of course. In the meantime, we've got a little bit of time just to talk about dog cloning, because I think it's important. This is inside The Guardian, Cindy, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm a massive dog fan, so any stories to do with dogs, I immediately am fascinated and also, you know, very amused by. But actually, this is not necessarily, you know, I mean, it's a controversial story. There's a company in the UK which is taking genetic data from deceased pets and sending them basically to the States for them to actually be cloned. And it costs about £40,000 for a dog to be cloned. So that was a small handful of pet owners in the UK who have cloned their deceased pets. But there are obviously real ethical concerns about this because it's cloning.
Are you very brief? We've only got about 10 seconds. Would you do it for your dog?
Probably not.
And
Probably
I'm getting
not.
a Smalls shout out because I've got a puppy named Smalls, but I've had two very, very different dogs.
We're out of time. We'll talk about them next hour. For the moment, thanks very much indeed.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered.